it will become like this. Actually, hello everybody, welcome to GeekCamp 2022. I don't know why the organizers thought it was a good idea to put us first, but here we are. So like until the mic get put on, you will get a totally nonsense introduction. I have not seen many of you in person because for the past 2 years, I have been hibernating crab. Okay, we're supposed to share the mic now. Okay, so yeah, this will be a nonsense talk. But welcome to GeekCamp. Okay,
Thank you for volunteering to be the first speaker.
We never want to, your own self put us your one. Anyway, who is we? We are Gao Wei and Hui Jing, and we are the co-organizers of the now currently on infinite hiatus meetup Singapore CSS. And we are here to talk about wiggling web pages.
That's a very cute kitten. But I think a website should not do that.
Do what?
Shouldn't wiggle.
Wiggle.
So the other day, I was at our favorite cafe and I saw this again. As I scrolled through the menu, it doesn't scroll just vertically, it also scrolls horizontally sometimes. And because my thumb isn't a very fine cursor, what I mean when I want to scroll down, I can't really scroll perfectly vertically down. So I actually expect the website to guide me in that direction. Is that too much to ask? Imagine a sliding door. It's supposed to slide in just one direction, the direction restricted by its track. It shouldn't move forward or backward, and it shouldn't get stuck as it slides. Well, I'm not saying that websites should never scroll horizontally. Some websites implement primarily horizontal scroll, and it can be beautiful. But I am expecting it to scroll only in the intended direction. And in most cases, that should be one direction at a time. So I think my comfort about this comes from the desktop time as much as from the physical world. On desktop, we use a mouse, like a scroll wheel, which is a one-dimensional cursor. By default, web pages scroll vertically. And even when the content region may scroll in both directions, the default behavior when you use the mouse is to scroll vertically, and only when you hold shift, it will trigger the other direction and switch mode and scroll horizontally. But standing here today as a web developer, if I am to text my younger self, like in middle school, I don't know, 20 years ago, back then I was using a Symbian phone. Like, hey, you know what? 20 years later, web developers, our generation, cannot implement page scrolling properly because phones now have touch screen. I would feel pretty ashamed myself. So how did we become so ignorant?
Okay, so I think maybe some of you not front end, some of you are front end. So I ask the front end people. Do you even test on a real device? You don't answer me? You own self answer your own conscience inside you ask, you got test or not? Because let's say you are like me, and I self-proclaim, one day I resize browser 1,000 times a day. It's still not enough. You know why? Because sometimes you never go down to a sufficiently narrow viewport. And this chart, not I do one, there's credit, it's by someone who wanted to shit on Samsung. But the point is like, you see even today, right, there is like the 4.8 inch and below pool of devices, still quite popular one. Samsung still need to earn money one. So if you have DevTools as a separate window, and I know about a lot of my friends who dev, they just take it out because it's easier, right? There's a hard cap. There's a hard cap on the minimum width with the DevTools undocked one. So for Firefox is about 435. For Chrome is 500. Safari even more generous, like 559, then they don't let you shrink already. So if you dock your DevTools, okay, you can shrink until 0. But if not, it will become like that. Another way is like, oh, okay, then you're like, no, I'm a responsible mobile web developer. I will click on the device simulator button. Ding. I agree, it's quite good. But there are still differences because your hardware, your operating system, your browser engine, all different. So she will explain to you why different, right?
Yeah, so there are quite a lot of intrinsic interaction differences between between a real device and the simulator that we may have more overlooked. So first is that finger touches are not the same as a mouse navigation. A mouse is a fine cursor. You can see and point exactly at your intended spot, but you can't do that on your phone. And the scroll wheel is naturally restricting your scroll direction, but we don't have that on the touch screen. So the second point is there are certain behaviors that are only present on mobile devices. I have one, bad example. A few years ago, there's a classic WebKit property that all our web developers need to implement, the WebKit overflow scrolling touch. What it does is that on iOS devices, if you don't have that, when you scroll, it doesn't have the momentum. It's weird if you know what it is, but if you don't, maybe your users don't, and if you didn't implement that, as you scroll, the page will be sticky to your fingers. So that is something that you can only see on a mobile device. And then there's performance considerations. Some gestures are running nicely on our MacBook Pros, but maybe not as performant on lower-end phones. And there's only collapsing headers and layouts, which we really often overlook. Like when you scroll up and down, the header will expand and collapse. And also when you pull out the keyboard, some of the things may be covered, and you get a very, very small viewport. So, oops, technology. Yeah. So yeah, next time if you are about to promise that your website is supported on mobile phone, do test it on your own phone first before you can make that promise.
Just in case you don't know how to test your own phone, I'm here to tell you that you can connect your phone to your computer using a USB cable. USB still can use one. So we have a lot of browsers. If you are a web front-end developer, you must have at least 6 browsers on your phone. Then you qualify. You must, your phone and your desktop. So you must have 2 versions of Firefox, 2 versions of Chrome, 2 versions of Safari, then some random indie browser just to prove a point. Anyway, if you are using an iOS device, then ideally you should have a Mac. If you don't have a Mac, then you should make friends with someone who has a Mac. Then like, hey, I need to test, then let them borrow a computer. So if Mac OS, you check Safari is very good. You will have to turn on the developer-related settings because Apple somehow don't want you to anyhowly touch things. I also don't know why. But generally, the process, because it's the same ecosystem, is very seamless. And then your device will just naturally show up under the develop menu. Actually, it's quite good. This one I admit. Chrome and Android also, same manufacturer, same benefit. They also play very well together. So basically, even though for Android there's 1 million, I keep holding my phone because it's an Android phone. It's a $100 Android phone made in China. Anyway, even though there are 1 million variations of the Android OS, general guidance is you just go and search for developer options, you turn on USB debugging, and then Chrome kind of sort of naturally has it. I can't remember if I got turned on anything, but we'll have one. It's not very pro tip, it's a noob tip. If you connect already, then you're like, hey, why doesn't it show up on the devices menu? You must remember that you must make sure the Chrome on your phone turn on. Because sometimes it's like, I never turn on, then like, hey, why doesn't show up? Why doesn't show up? Then like, hey, it's my home screen. So must make sure Chrome is running on the phone. In theory, Firefox also can one, but Firefox don't have OS manufacturer. So this one a bit GG. Somehow, me personally, it's my problem, not Firefox problem. I cannot turn on USB debugging. Maybe you need some Android SDK thing. So if there's like an Android developer here, then you hey, this noob never install the Android ADB, don't know what. Then you can't tell me later. So the most important thing is, like Alcoholic Anonymous, the first step in the 12-step program is to you must know that you have a problem. So how do you find your problem? There is no good formula to find your problem. So it's very case by case depending on the site that you run into. Also, if my level of Singlish is too Singlish, you raise your hand and ask, dial back the meter. I can go back. It can go from all the way from Singlish all the way to Queen's English one. I can Queen's English one, trust me. R.I.P. Queen. Anyway, but it's a very case by case situation. So if you like consistency, you are not going to like what I'm about to tell you. Usually, if you are very lucky, it's like this one easy to find. What you do is you just scroll all the way to oh no, this is the GeekCamp website. And next year, you won't see us anymore. But anyway, you scroll all the way to the overflow already. Then you just keep scrolling. Scroll until you see something poke out. Then you see the thing poke out, like, I found you. Then that's how you do it. So that's a best case scenario. But sometimes you'll get like invisible elements. Like, cause I always have ad blocker. So actually a lot of times the offending element is an ad. But then you turn on your ad blocker. Then you GG, you cannot see it lor. Wow, sweet out. But it's like detective work. So if you think about it, if every robbery and every murder in the world was solved the same way, then police department do what? Then you got job for what? Right? This is your job. So you must embrace the difficulty. So the more worst case scenario is you might have to brute force it. So you go to the body element, you go to the first level, right? You open DevTools and then you just start deleting things. So you delete like, is the overflow still there? No, next one, delete. Oh, it's still there. Oh, and then after that, you found, oh, this one. Then you just drill down. You drill down into the children, the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren, some more into the 18th level of hell until you find the offending element. That's the brute force method. So, this unsatisfying answer, sorry. But okay, now that you have discovered that you have found the element and then you investigate, got a lot of reasons. A common reason is like, sometimes the layout code is just not written correctly. So got some slight minor issue only. GeekCamp website minor issue only. It's fixed now. If you all check now, don't have already. Just to double check. But sometimes it's because you never let something shrink properly. So this is a contrived example. But like sometimes, where's my cursor? Okay. So sometimes maybe you have a mean width value on a grid item. But this is very reasonable. You want a mean width on something because especially if it's like image, right? You also don't want it to shrink until like cannot see, and what's the point of putting an image there, right? So this is understandable. But let's say instead of using mean width that will prevent like natural shrinkage, you can let the browser do the calculation for you. So if you happen to use grid, right? Grid has this very convenient function called min max. Turn on. This one don't need. Then it will be okay already one. But then you're like, hey, wait, the spacing a bit big. Okay, spacing big. Then okay you tweak. Tweak. Maybe it looks better. But as you can see, right, this kind of tweak, right, is not very reliable because there will always be some point that's like very awkward. Then how? Like, there will never be a point that it looks good. Does that mean you don't let the browser do work? No. You must think be more open-mindedly. Just add breakpoint. Dude, as good as it feels to do things in a single line of code, right? Nobody ever said that you cannot write more code. It's not like there's a hard cap on how much code you need to write. Even though I would love to apply this hard cap on some people on some projects that I work with. But I never say who. But adding a breakpoint is actually not terrible because actually the designers will like you also because with additional breakpoints you can be very specific on how nicely the design fits. So if you just feel that there's a very awkward point in your content, right? Just hit one breakpoint in, can already. So yeah, breakpoints are your friends. Then sometimes it's sometimes not really a layout issue per se. Sometimes like your items got like super long string. Then the browser is a very polite piece of software. If you never tell it to break, it won't break one. It's like I think this developer would like this string to be very long, so I'll just display it as a string that's very long. But sometimes then it breaks your layout. But browsers generally are very smart pieces of software. Browsers can speak many languages. And you know why browsers can speak many languages? Because dictionary. So anyway, line breaking and word breaking is very non-trivial. So like there is a dedicated talk for like, I don't know, half an hour on just line breaking that I've linked here. I'm very sure nobody will watch it, but I still put the link there. But generally, if the string doesn't need to stay together, actually honestly URL don't stay together, so never mind one lah. Just let it break, right? So the magic CSS property that you are looking for here is test my type with one hand skill. Oh my god. Ah. Huh? Typo already ah? Aish. You all try type with one hand, see how fast you are. Okay, it worked. So if you line break all right, then it break nicely, and then my scroll bar disappear. No more horizontal overscroll, no more wiggly website. Excellent. And then because word break is a inheritable property, you want to put on the container also can, you want to put on the item also can. Up to you. OT. Aya, a bit too late for that, bro.
I thought you were gonna do more typing, so.
I think only got like 1 or 2 more, it's okay. If you want to, if you are a speaker who want the Beyonce mic, please approach them before your talk and not during the talk. Pro tip, yo. Anyway, okay, continue with the word thing, right? Hyphenation, can you hyphenate? What is hyphenate? If your English teacher got teach you hyphenation, you're supposed to hyphenate at the correct syllable. But I never pay attention to English class, so I also don't know. I also don't know where to hyphenate. But because the browser has dictionary capabilities, the browser knows where to hyphenate. But by default, right, hyphenation is set to manual. Like the value, property value is literally manual. Manual means what? Manually means you own self go and hyphenate. So if you want hyphens that are already visible, like they are always visible, right, you use this UTF, like let's call it ampersand dash semicolon. And then there's also invisible dash, whereby if there's enough space, right, you won't see the hyphen. When you need to break, then it will just magically break there, and then got hyphen. That's why it's called invisible hyphen. Then it's ampersand shy semicolon. But this only makes sense if you have complete control over the content and the markup. And I bet you are not the one writing the content. I challenge if you have like an army of content writers, you go and ask them, hey, friend, can you use ampersand shy semicolon in the content when you write hyphen? They'll probably look at you and like, eh? Like cannot. I if you can, I clap for you. But even if you can coordinate all your content writers to do this magically, right? What if your system use Markdown? Then you end up have to like Markdown and then HTML, and then it's not so straightforward to just everybody just manually put in your invisible hyphens. No. But browsers actually can do automatic hyphenation. This I tell you this example. Do you know how long it took for me to go and find all the languages? All of these these are actual languages. Okay, it's not gibberish. Okay, but these are. You have to set the lang attribute correctly. Why? Because earlier we said browsers are very smart. Browsers can speak many languages only if they have the correct dictionary. So if you set the lang attribute correctly, then you know to check which dictionary to see where to hyphen. Hyphenation, it makes sense to put it manually, because actually if you incorrectly hyphenate something, it's very hard to read one. It's like even more confusing, better not. So browsers will use dictionary to figure out where the hyphen kick in. So the magic CSS property that I need to not type wrongly is hyphens. Auto? Okay. Then all the language are hyphenated correctly. You can own self go and see the source code and see what this language are. I also don't know what language this is, my god. Even though browser support, I play cheat, I'm using Firefox, so the hyphenation look very nice. But you try this on Chrome, you try. I ask you to try, I'm not gonna tell you, no spoilers. So that's for words and for layout. So there's a complete demo, I call it the cat demo. It's nicer to open in CodePen and try yourself, then you can do the actual resizing thing. Okay, pass.
Nested scrolling. So nested scrolling happens when both your page and a component inside the page have scrolling. There will be a stacked scroll bar. So when users scroll in the inside component, the page will stay at the same level, which makes sense. And then when the component scroll position is at its bottom, try scrolling the component in the same direction. It should continue scroll in the page direction. But sometimes it doesn't. I think this happens only on iOS. Doesn't happen on Android. But nevertheless, your user who are on iOS may get trapped here. So when this happens, the page is stuck in that scroll position because it constantly triggers the inner component only. So us developers, we are power users. We may be sharp enough to notice that, oh, I'm trapped in the inside component, and so if I carefully scroll the page, I can untrap myself sometimes, but not always. So before trying tackling this problem, I think we can first ask ourselves whether this situation is really necessary. Do we really want an inner component that scrolls vertically at the same time as the page component? So actually, web pages intrinsically grow taller as the content grows, and phone screens are only a palm size. So what's behind the necessity of having the nested region that encapsulate a long content and have the stacked scroll bar situation? Thanks. So if it is, somehow your designer says so, if it is necessary, we need to help our users not get trapped in the stacked scroll bar situation. So make sure that the page have enough margin so the users can scroll outside, and also make and also you can differentiate the page a bit more clearly, so users know where they are when they scroll. Sometimes this stacked scroll bar is caused by iframe. For example, in the past 2 years, all the climbing gyms require booking, and normally their static website won't have like a booking functionality, so they embed an iframe for you to book in another website. And then as they load the calendar, sometimes the content grows, and then you have an iframe that is scrolling inside your page, and maybe the iframe even has like full width, and then you can get trapped there. But to my happy surprise, one of my favorite gyms in town, they got this fixed. So now it sets the height of the iframe. So here it's loading the calendar now. And if you notice, after the calendar is loaded, you will still have only one scroll bar. And then the iframe is set to the height that is of the inner content of that web page. So how can you do that? One naive solution is to set the iframe to be a sufficient height for its inner content. This works, of course, only if you already know that the inner content has a fixed height. Otherwise, you may leave the parent page with a lot of empty space. You try to overshoot the height, right? But then, even if you do overshoot the height, there's still no guarantee that your inner page cannot grow past that predetermined height. So a more programmatic solution is to set a height to the iframe height, the inner content of the iframe page, when the embedded page finishes loading. So this is not difficult if it gives you better UI, but there's limitation. If it's same domain, then you can do it without much of a caveat, because the parent has access to the content window.body.scroll height. So you can do changes only on the parent page. But more often than not, the case is you have to embed a page from a different domain, in which case you can't have access to the content window scroll height. So in this case, you need to leverage the browser communication window.postMessage, which means your inner page has to implement something for the parent page to receive that information when it update the height of the parent iframe. Nested scrolling can be of different direction. For example, you may have a row of images to be displayed on a narrow screen by introducing an intended horizontal flow scroll. So personally speaking, I think this UI is acceptable only if you don't let me scroll both directions at the same time. If you look at this web page, there's a carousel, and users are supposed to like swipe or click to paginate the carousel. But as I swipe, like I mentioned, my fingers are not a very fine cursor. The page can move vertically as well, and it doesn't feel very stable. So there's actually a CSS property called touch action that lets us block the scrolling in the unintended direction when the component is intended to scroll only in one direction. So here are some demos. Touch action none means you cannot scroll at all. And if you pan X, it's only gonna scroll in the horizontal direction. And if you pan Y, it's gonna scroll vertically. So this is very useful when you implement the carousel component like that. So your users will only be able to trigger the scrolling in one direction. And when you do, the page stays there in the other direction. So here's an example of a site that I think is implemented pretty nicely. So you can swipe left and right on the carousel, and then the page will stay there and feel more stable that way. Another potential situation. Just now, Hui Jing mentioned how min-width may become a problematic layout, but sometimes we're building a very complex app, and it's not easy for us to, take down the min-width and tackle every single component. So this, even though it is potentially undesirable, perhaps it's a situation we have to deal with. So is there any workaround that can get us some minimally usable web app that doesn't introduce unnecessary horizontal scrolling? So yeah, imagine your app is originally built for a very big desktop screen, perhaps a very complex dashboard, or a highly developed e-commerce app. And for whatever legacy reason it is, the app already assumes min-width that's causing overflow on tablets. And now the app is mature with many intricate features and built and supported by a handful of teams. I see my previous team members here. Cannot see which company it is, but and one day your PM comes to you and say, hey, I think it's time that we ship for tablets. Right? Because from tracking data, many users are using tablets. And probably increasing number of users are using tablets. So they give you an iPad, and the first thing you do, you go and check the app. And this is our very beautiful, complex app. And it's introducing a horizontal overflow. And guess what? Your users can change orientation. Maybe we really hope that they stay horizontally, but no. The iPad is in their hands, not in yours. So your goal is to make it minimally useful on tablets. And horizontal overflow is deemed unacceptable. So how do you go take down that min width and try to fix every single component that breaks your smaller viewpoint? Maybe you want to, I wanted to, but it wasn't very feasible. I don't even know the developer who, I don't even know the developer who worked on every single feature, and I don't even know all the logical conditions that will trigger certain components to show. It's not possible for me to fix them. So I want to introduce you to one use case of the viewport meta tag, which is often poorly understood, I think. So this is quite often seen in a mobile browser. So it's actually a very ancient technology. Ever since the very early days, mobile browsers come with two viewports, not one. A visual viewport, which is roughly how big your mobile screen is, taking away the header and the footer, perhaps. And users may scroll to change the part of the page that he sees, or zoom in and out to change the scale of the visual viewport. Note that the visual viewport follows the actual screen size. So that's for example, on phone it's probably 375 pixels. That's a visual viewport. And then there is a layout viewport, which the mobile browsers gives your web page for layout purpose. So your CSS media queries will receive the dimensions of the layout viewport, not the visual viewport. And the dimension of the layout viewport can be much bigger than the visual viewport. And that's actually how mobile browsers in the old days shrunk down the very big desktop websites to those tiny screens. There's a very nice article called Tale of Two Viewports. You can take a look. So I want to show you a demo of how that works. This is the app that I just showed you. And without me doing anything, it's causing a horizontal overflow. You can see this. and I can change orientation, and it will be even narrower. Here's what happened if I add this viewport meta tag to the HTML head. Can we show this? So in this tag, it says viewport content width is 1006 pixels. So let me show you how it looks like. So I have so here it says the viewport width is 1006 pixels, and my content doesn't scroll horizontally anymore. And if I change orientation, it still says 1006 on the viewport size, even though we know that the visual viewport size has changed. And perhaps the text is too small, but note that users actually have the option to zoom out and zoom in case they feel the font size is too small. Okay. But there are a few caveats for this. First is that by setting the layout viewport for this purpose, it actually invalidates your responsive design, because now your viewport is set at a certain value. So it doesn't matter how small your device is, it will be fixed at that value. So all your CSS media queries will treat the web page as that width. There's also a discrepancy between layout size and actual size. So as developer, we have to constantly bear in mind that, oh, okay, the actual device can be 800 pixels, but in fact, I'm like cheating, and the width that the website receives is actually 1600 pixels. So you have to have that in mind. But it could be an easier thing or more difficult thing depending on how you see this, because now you only ship for one dimension. And then the final potential problem is you have to sell to your designers. Like, fonts can be too small, but the other side of the story, you have to fix every single component, right? So which problem do you want to tackle? And so we managed to sell to the designer by saying that, users can zoom out and zoom in. So if font's too small, it's still bearable, and it's a very intimate browsing experience that you have on a tablet. So that's how we managed to sell the idea. So yeah, that's the story of the viewport tag. Back to you.
Okay. So we talk a lot about technical solutions, right? We talk about CSS, we talk about viewport tag, we talk about iframe, we talk a lot of things. But there are a lot of times where, like what she said, right? She had to sell to marketing people. That's not. I mean, I know there are some people who can speak very well and are developers, but I just feel in general we're not very good at like selling shit. But I feel that like comparatively, technical solutions are sometimes easier to come up with than the people or business side problems. Like developers, right? We hang out with each other too much. So like we take for granted that like whatever I just say, right? I assume you all know what I'm talking about. Viewport meta tag, yeah, I know what there is. Actually, if I make my mother sit in front of me and like, hey, your youngest daughter giving talk in front of a lot of people, you can't support. She'll probably she'll like, okay, can. Then she'll look at me and she'll like, explain again. No, explain slower. Don't speak so fast. And then after a while, she'll probably say like, hey, actually, you come and fix my printer problem. That's pretty much what my mother will come and tell me, okay? The point I'm trying to make here is that not everyone that runs a website is a developer, right? Like my mother can cook very well. So maybe like, hey, I'm very bored now. I'm going to start my own restaurant business. If she does have a website for it, right? She's not a developer. And I don't live at home anymore. She cannot, like, I also don't want her to call me every other day, like, hey, this my website, cannot, how do I want to make the button green. So the thing is, what if your website owner is not a technical person and there's no developers, like, but the point of this chicken gif is that I have no meaningful answer. And basically, this is the most unsatisfying talk you'll ever listen to, because like, there are a lot of things got no answer one. It's just, I think, something for a lot of people to ponder about. Like if you have the Like when we browse a website, then I call this occupational hazard. Then you start becoming very judgy, like, hey yo, why who do one? Hey, why hold on, gonna test properly? Like, okay lah, don't be so judgy. Maybe the person really like no budget, no time, no developer. Like, yeah, sometimes that's life lah. Huh? Okay. So yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you for sitting through this nonsense opening talk. We have successfully set the bar about this height, right? So all the subsequent speakers, y'all can just roll over it and do better. Okay, thank you everybody. No need MC one ah.
Yeah, hello. We have the first track for Barcamp,
Okay, so
travel hacks.
there is-
It'll be in the last room over here. Okay, starting now. Who's next?
okay, so there's
actually
actually Q&A.
There's a few questions.
Yeah, there's a Q&A. Go back. Cool.
Okay lah, there's only one lah.
Is there only one question? Okay, read it out lah.
Okay.
Read out.
If I'm too it's anonymous.
Okay.
If I'm too tired to find the offending wriggly child component, does slapping a touch action pen Y on my body let me close the bug and go home?
Again, this is a philosophical answer. You can do it. Nobody say cannot. If never say cannot means can. But then you ask your conscience, can or not? You people see the thing cut off. You okay or not? You at night can sleep or not? If you can sleep, then okay lor. If you cannot sleep, then work a bit harder lah. Okay, that's the answer. No more, right?
Yeah, no more.
Oh yeah. Okay, bye.
Give it up for first speaker.